How's it going, everyone? Canada is scheduled to have an election in fall 2025, but theoretically that election could happen earlier. We're going to look at the numbers to see how likely that early election is, and if Donald Trump's recent comments about Canada being the 51st state and about Freeland and Trudeau, if all of that is intended to speed up the process and get Canada's election happening sooner. So, to discuss all that, we're going to have to briefly talk about how Canadian elections work. Canadians do not elect the Prime Minister directly. Instead, Canada is separated into 338 electoral districts, and there are 338 seats in Canadian Parliament. Canadians vote for who will represent their electoral district in Parliament. And if a party wins more votes than anyone else in an electoral district, then that party wins a seat in Parliament. So, for every electoral district where a party gets more votes than anyone else, they get a seat in Parliament. And it doesn't matter if they win 100% of the votes in an electoral district or 40% of the votes. As long as they get more than anyone else, they win that electoral district. Their party member will represent that electoral district in Parliament. They win the seat that corresponds to that electoral district. Now, once all the seats have been won by somebody, then it is those ministers of Parliament, those 338 of them, who select the Prime Minister. And typically that's going to be the leader of the party that has won the most seats. Now, if a political party wins the majority of the seats, as in more than 50% of the seats, well, then it's guaranteed that that party's leader is going to be the Prime Minister. What polls show right now is that the Conservative Party is very far in the lead, projected to win 226 out of 338 seats. That is more than 50%, which means that their leader is going to be the Prime Minister, and they don't have to make deals with other parties to get the support of the majority of Parliament. They can just get majority based on support of their own party. Now, what happens if a political party wins more seats than anyone else but does not win 50% or more of the seats? Because Canada has more than two political parties, this is possible. For example, a party could win 40% of the seats and some other party wins 30 and some other party wins 30. Well, the party that won 40% of the seats still gets more seats than anyone else. So what happens then? Well, that is what happened in Canada's last election, which resulted in the Liberal Party winning 153 seats. Now, that is less than 50%. With 338 seats, you need 170 in order to have majority. So if a party wins more than anyone else, but less than 50% of the seats, that's called a minority government. And for that party to stay in power, they need to make deals with some other political parties in order to have bills passed and in order for the Prime Minister to stay in power. Because at any point, the opposition can declare a vote of non-confidence. They can have everyone in Parliament vote on whether the Prime Minister should leave or not, and if the Prime Minister leaves, then there is an early election. So in order for the Prime Minister to stay in power and not be voted out that way, well, that party with the minority government needs to make deals with some other parties that have some other amount of seats so that they have more than 50% support of Parliament. So the Liberal Party, since the last election, has had an alliance with the New Democratic Party to support them. Okay, the deal was that the Liberals will have some policies that the New Democratic Party wants, and in exchange for that, the New Democratic Party will vote to support the Liberals, to support Prime Minister Trudeau and keep him in power. See, 153 seats of the Liberals plus 25 seats of the New Democrats takes us above 170, giving the Liberal and New Democrat alliance a majority of Parliament. Now, this is a good moment to mention what Canada's political parties are. So you've got the Liberal Party, okay, the one in power right now. They are kind of like the Democrats in the United States. You've got the New Democratic Party, that's who the Liberals are in alliance with, and they are farther left-wing. They are what Americans would call the progressive wing of the Democratic Party or the socialist wing of the Democratic Party. That's what the New Democrats are like. Then you have the Conservative Party. This is a center-right wing party, kind of like moderate Republicans and centrist Democrats. That sort of alliance, if you can imagine. That's what the Conservative Party is like in Canada. Other than that, you have the Bloc Québécois, which is a more French-Canadian nationalist party in the province of Quebec. You've got the Green Party, and you've got some independents. You've also got the People's Party of Canada, which is a more right-wing party, farther right-wing than the Conservatives. And in terms of popular vote, they're approximately as popular as the Greens, but they don't actually win any seats because their popularity is spread out throughout all of Canada. There's a little bit of support all over Canada, but to win seats, you need to get more votes than anyone else in an electoral district. And there is no electoral district where the People's Party has more votes than anyone else. Whereas for the Greens, there are a couple, exactly 2 electoral districts where support for the Greens is really concentrated, and so they win those 2 seats. So, considering that the Liberals and the New Democrats are both left-wing parties, it makes sense why they formed this alliance. For an early election to happen in Canada, the majority of Parliament, 170 votes or more, is going to have to be cast against the Liberals. Well, if the New Democrats keep supporting the Liberals, that takes them to above 170, and so an early election doesn't happen. Now, let's say the New Democrats pull their support from the Liberal Party. Well, then the Liberals are down to 153, but they can get these 33 votes from the Bloc Québécois. See, the Bloc Québécois understand that once Conservatives come to power, as projections show, they will have a majority of the seats, 226. They won't have to make deals with any other party to do what they want. And so the Bloc Québécois wouldn't get much out of that. Whereas if the Bloc Québécois makes some deal with the Liberals, they might get something out of that. So the Bloc Québécois do have incentive to keep the Liberals in power. So even if New Democrats stop supporting the Liberals, the Bloc Québécois might offer their support, taking that number above 170, and Liberals stay in power. So, for Liberals to lose power early and have an early election, you would need both the New Democrats and the Bloc Québécois to decide that they won't support the Liberals. But there is another possibility. What if some of the Liberal ministers of Parliament decide that they will sit out and not vote for their own party to stay in power? Now, it sounds far-fetched, but lately there have been rumors that up to 60 Liberal MPs have said that they have lost confidence in their Prime Minister. Now, the question comes up, why would that happen? Why would the New Democrats or the Bloc Québécois decide to not support the Liberals when that's the only thing that gives them any say in Parliament? Why would Liberal MPs decide not to support their own party, right? They all understand that once an early election happens, chances are Conservatives get majority of the seats and don't need to negotiate with any party to stay in power for 4 years. Well, what it comes down to is, at the end of the day, every Minister of Parliament cares about their own seat. If their party loses, but they still win in their electoral district, they get to stay in Parliament. they still get to represent their electoral district in parliament, even if they're not on the winning side, and they get to keep their job. So on one hand, the New Democrats and the Bloc Québécois may understand that if they support the Liberal government, they are supporting a very unpopular government, and some Canadians might not like that. Now look at this data from a recent Abacus poll. Okay, a question was, should Trudeau resign or stay on? Okay, you have 67% of Canadians say resign, but when we break it up by party, among Liberal Party supporters, 26% say resign. Among NDP supporters, 60% say resign. Of course, among Conservatives, 90% say resign. But these are large numbers, 26% and 60% from the Liberal Party and the NDP Party. Look at this other question. Should there be a federal election now? 58% say yes. 35% of Liberals are saying yes, let's have a federal election now. 47% of NDP supporters say yes, let's have an election now. Okay, so again, even though they probably understand that their party will lose that election, some of the ministers of parliament that are Liberal or NDP or Bloc Québécois, although they're not shown in this poll, they might think, you know what, I personally will be more popular if I vote to have an election now, and that makes it more likely that I keep my seat. And this may especially be true for the Liberals, and here's why. Okay, here's polling data for who supports which federal party over the years. Okay, this data starts in the start of 2022. Now, what begins to happen really in the fall of 2022, but it really becomes much more visible in summer 2023, is the Conservatives are gaining support while the Liberals are losing support. And the slope of these two lines, the blue dots, which is the Conservative color in Canada, going up, and the red dots, that's the Liberal Party's color in Canada, going down, that slope is pretty much the same, just one's positive and one's negative. So what is that telling you? Red dots going down at the same slope as blue dots going up? It tells you that people are switching their support from the Liberal Party to the Conservative Party. And if you were to project this trend into the future, it looks like it just keeps going like that. And some Liberal MPs might be thinking, well, if an election is held now, I could still keep my seat even though my party loses. Whereas if the election happens next fall, well, as time goes on, my party loses even more support. And if the election happens next fall, I might not have enough support to keep my seat anymore. They may think, well, we're losing the election anyways, may as well get it over with sooner and I get to keep my seat, or at least I'm more likely to keep my seat, rather than the election happening a few months later, but I don't get to keep my seat. Some Liberal MPs might be making that calculation based on this data right here. Now, another thing to make note of is look at how many seats the Liberals are projected to win versus the Bloc Québécois. 47 versus 45. That is very close. Now, if a party has the second most seats, they are considered the official opposition, and even though they lost, they do get some perks in Parliament. And Liberal Party members might be thinking, you know what, if the election is held right now, at least we're more likely to get second place and be the official opposition. But if time goes on and we wait for almost another year, well, then we might have less seats than the Bloc Québécois, and not only do we lose the election, but we also do not become the official opposition either. That could also motivate them to have an election sooner. And then we have entering the field Donald Trump, who has been threatening 25% tariffs onto Canada unless Canada enacts stricter rules on border security. And Canada's Finance Minister Freeland recently either resigned or got fired, or kind of a combination of both, and then publicly stated that the reason for her disagreement with Trudeau was how to handle the situation considering Trump's tariff threat. And likely there's other Liberal MPs who disagree with the Prime Minister on how to handle the situation as well. Now, it's no secret that Donald Trump would prefer to work with the Canadian Conservative Party in power, and Elon Musk, who works closely with Donald Trump, has recently endorsed the Conservative Party leader, and Trump has been making a lot of comments lately, joking about Canada being the 51st state, about Trudeau being its governor. After Freeland resigned or got fired, Trump made comments critical of Freeland. So, could Donald Trump's comments be intended to put pressure on Liberal and NDP ministers of Parliament, and to some extent Bloc Québécois ministers of Parliament, and send them a bit into panic mode, thinking, you know what, if Trudeau stays in power for another year, while Trump is also in power for most of that year, and the two men don't get along very well, what is that going to mean for me? What is that going to mean for Canadian wallets? And am I going to lose support in my own electoral district, considering the fact that there are NDP supporters and Liberal Party supporters and probably Bloc Québécois supporters as well who want an election sooner? Could those Trump posts and statements be calculated in order to increase the likelihood of a Canadian election happening sooner, so the Conservatives get into power sooner with a majority government? Well, the numbers suggest that this is certainly a possibility. I'll see you later.